Carrier development within the United States Navy in the 1920s was a mixed bag. In 1919, it was authorized that the fleet collier Jupiter be converted into CV-1 USS Langley, which was recommissioned in 1922. For all intents and purposes, this ship was purely an experimental carrier. The first true carriers the United States would construct were also conversions. CV-2 and 3, Lexington and Saratoga, were converted battlecruiser hulls that were canceled as a result of the Washington Naval Treaty. The Washington Naval Treaty also imposed limitations as to the total tonnage a navy was allowed to have. Following the commissioning of Langley, Lexington, and Saratoga, the United States Navy only had 69,000 tons left. Under the restrictions, the first purpose-built U.S. aircraft carrier, CV-4, USS Ranger, was a 14,000-ton design that was largely based off of experiments conducted with Langley because there was not adequate time to get results from Lexington and Saratoga. However, the lack of experience with the Lexingtons would change by 1930, and by 1931 enough experience had been collected to where the United States Navy was ready to fulfill the remaining 55,000 tons allocated to them for carrier construction. The General Board was divided into whether the United States Navy should devote its resources into constructing a couple of large, more useful carriers, or a series of smaller, more role-selective carriers. Due to this division within the General Board, a compromise agreement was reached to where two 20,000-ton carriers would be constructed, followed up by a 15,000-ton vessel. Design work for the two 20,000-ton carriers would begin on the 22nd of May, 1931, when the Bureau of Aeronautics sent a series of requirements to the Secretary of the Navy for the new ships. The requirements outlined that the new ships were to have improved aviation handling facilities. This meant better ordnance spaces, increased storage spaces, and 2 decks that could launch aircraft. The ships were to also have improved defensive qualities, which meant that their protection in both armor thicknesses and torpedo defensive systems were to be similar to that of the new generation of heavy cruisers then under proposal, which would become the New Orleans class. They were to also have an increased number of defensive weapons, up to 12 5-inch guns, and an unspecified number of automatic machine guns. Finally, it was also anticipated that the ships were capable of keeping up with any escorts, which would be heavy cruisers and destroyers, so they needed to have a maximum speed of no less than 32.5 knots. These design requirements instantly set off alarm bells from all directions. As Captain Lewis Cox from War Plans stated, "I am not prepared to say anything about their armament. I understand the general opinion now is that the 5-inch two-purpose gun is considered sufficient. However, it seems to me that this relegates them to the role of battle line carriers." Admiral Marvel stated, "If there are only 2 cruisers with carrier, the commanding officer of the cruisers would like to have an excess speed of about 10 knots over the carrier, on account of the fact that the carrier is so erratic in her movements. She will suddenly make a turn, and you have got to get ahead again." Admiral Lanning stated, "We formerly thought that by fighting in the air we could get control of the air like we can on the surface, but we find that no number of defensive planes can keep off all air attacks. Everybody, immediately there's a fight of any kind, seeks to put the enemy's aircraft out of business, and the only way to do that is to ruin the flying decks of his carriers. And the only way to do that is with aircraft." With the initial requirements and all specified concerns in mind, preliminary design had decided to sketch a series of different carrier proposals ranging from 13,500 tons to the specified 20,000 tons, and in July of 1931 they produced 8 designs: A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. Unfortunately, none of these designs were selected. The Bureau of Aeronautics liked Design B, but, as for everybody else, all of the designs seemed like unacceptable compromises. As a result, the General Board requested that preliminary design create a second batch of designs. These would be I, J, K, and L, and these designs would be drawn up in August of 1931. Having 12 designs put before them, the General Board decided on the 2nd of September 1931 that two designs seemed adequate to fulfill the 20,000-ton carriers for the 1933 building year and the 15,000-ton carrier for the 1934 building year. These would be designs H and I. H and I would be sent off for further evaluation, and on the 7th of October 1931, some sound characteristics were presented to the General Board. This incorporated a complement of 40 50-caliber machine guns and 8 5-inch dual-purpose guns. The defensive protective systems would be aimed at defending the ship's vitals from 6-inch shell fire. The flight deck would have an overall length of 708 feet and a width of 80 feet. It would also have catapults on both ends and 3 elevators to service the aircraft. A week later, on the 14th of October, the Secretary of the Navy requested a new batch of designs. These would become designs M, N, and O. The reason for this third batch of designs was because he had received feedback from the Lexington and Saratoga, and the crews seemed to enjoy having the 8-inch guns for defensive fire. These 3 designs became a part of what is now known as the Flying Deck Cruiser. This is a type of warship that has never actually been constructed, but was seriously contemplated by the world's leading navies in the early 1930s. It is effectively a standard cruiser that has a partial hangar and flight deck space for aviation handling. By December of 1931, it was recognized that none of the flying deck cruiser designs were satisfactory, as the United States Navy envisioned aircraft carriers using their aircraft to support the fleet. Devoting space to armament on these ships took away from aircraft numbers and subsequently took away from support to the fleet. As a result, the Secretary of the Navy and the General Board once again approved Design I for further development on the 15th of December, 1931, and the general arrangement plan was completed on the 1st of February, 1932, with contracts being drawn up the next month. However, before contracts for construction were finalized, work was halted because Congress had not approved funding for the aircraft carriers for 1933, instead approving funding for heavy cruiser construction. Funds for the two 20,000-ton carriers would not be approved until the 16th of June 1933 under the National Industrial Recovery Act. With money having been approved, work once again resumed. Due to having gained an additional year to gain experience with other carriers in service, a series of requests were made to alter Design I to further improve its combat quality. The final characteristics for CV-5 and 6 are as follows. They would have a standard displacement of 19,800 tons, a full load displacement of 23,500 tons, an overall length of 824 feet 9 inches, with a flight deck length of 816 feet. They would have an overall beam of 109 feet 6 inches, and an average draft of 24 feet. The ships would have an oil carrying capacity of 4,280 tons, giving them an endurance of 12,500 nautical miles at 15 knots. They would be powered by 9 Babcock & Wilcox boilers operating at 400 psi, connecting to 4 Parsons geared turbines, producing 120,000 shaft horsepower, giving the ships a top speed of 32.5 knots. The ship's main armor belt would have a maximum thickness of 4 inches, tapering to 2.5 inches at its forward and after ends. The main armor deck would be comprised of 60-pound protective plates. The ship's armament would be made up of 8 single-mount 5-inch 38-caliber dual-purpose guns, 4 quad-mount 1.1-inch automatic cannons, and 24 single-mount 50-caliber machine guns. The aircraft complement would be 90 aircraft, with an aviation gasoline capacity of 177,950 gallons. The final design would only offer 1 flight deck, but it was a dual-purpose flight deck as aircraft could be launched from both the forward end and the after end. Finally, the ship had a total complement for 1,366 crew and 851 aviators. With the design having been finalized, the first ship, CV-5, was ordered on the 3rd of August 1933. Its keel was laid down on the 21st of May 1934 at the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company. It was launched on the 4th of April 1936 and commissioned on the 30th of September 1937, being named USS Yorktown. The second ship, CV-6, was ordered on the 3rd of August 1933, having its keel laid down on the 16th of July 1934 at the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company. It was launched on the 3rd of October 1936 and commissioned on the 12th of May 1938, being named USS Enterprise. By the time Enterprise was completed in 1938, the United States Navy had learned much about carrier design, and they had no interest in repeating the Yorktown design, instead opting to go for a much larger and further improved ship. However, in 1937, with Japan breaking away negotiations and the expiration of naval treaties, a rearmament program was initiated, and a carrier was necessary. The United States Navy wanted a carrier for the 1939 physical year. However, they were told a carrier design would not be ready by 1940 at the earliest, but most likely 1941, which was considered too much of a delay. So it was decided to repeat the Yorktown design, and a third ship, CV-8, was ordered on the 30th of March 1939, having its keel laid down on the 25th of September 1939 at the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company. It would be launched on the 14th of December 1940 and commissioned on the 20th of October 1941, being named USS Hornet. While the United States Navy was unsatisfied with the Yorktown design in the years leading up to the Second World War, the Second World War would certainly change that opinion, as the concept of the design proved solid. These three carriers would end up being amongst the most active carriers in the war, and arguably, their activity during the first half of the war was the most influential out of any Allied carrier. With that having been said, I have nothing more I wish to add on to this topic for today. So, if you have learned something new in this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.